The second one, we'll try to make it more interactive. I'm sorry for the first one being not interactive. But that's a point for you, because then I'll just pick. Okay? So, let's make it interactive. Brother Usher, can you please recite the verse?
Sure. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. إنما المؤمنون الذين إذا ذكر الله وجلت قلوبهم وإذا تليت عليهم آياته زادتهم إيمانا وعلى ربهم يتوكلون.
That's it. That's good. Thank you.
Sorry, the light's in the way.
Can we have another volunteer recite the English translation of this particular verse? This is Surah Anfal, verse number 2. Any English recite? The brother in the front in the green. Can you recite the English, please?
The faithful are only those whose hearts tremble with awe when Allah is mentioned, and when His signs are recited to them, they increase their faith, and who put their trust in their Lord.
Okay. This word, innama, is what's starting off as. Are the things that are mentioned in the Holy Quran, are they uncertain things? Are they iffy things? Asking serious question. No, they're not. Okay. So what does this innama do here? It's translated as certainly. Any takers? Sister in the green? Yeah, you right there. No takers? See, when you have a word in the text that says certainly is coming from a hakim, this particular text is saying what? Saying, listen, I'm putting extra emphasis here for you. All of my words are certain. All of the relationships that I make are certain. But in this particular case, be extra careful. Be more vigilant. If you claim to be from this group called Al-Mu'mineen, then here are some virtues that you must have. These virtues are definitely found in people who claim to be what? Al-Mu'mineen. There's a difference between Al-Mu'mineen in the Holy Quran and Al-Ladhina Amanu. I told you the Holy Quran, the way it brings these words is extremely important. What's the difference if I tell you that I'm playing soccer as opposed to I'm a soccer player? Was any taker there? So that's a question. Go ahead, sister.
Behavior versus actually the action actually being important.
So one time I'm telling you that, listen, I'm using a verb to describe that particular relationship between myself and that particular action. I'm saying I'm playing soccer. Okay. I'm playing soccer. The relationship between me and this action is that I'm doing this action. That's all I'm telling you. Okay. Another time I want to tell you about exactly what position does that verb have in my life. How important is it to me? And what relationship does it have with my identity, my person? And I tell you, I'm a soccer player. All of a sudden what I've done now is, I've said there's actually a very important link between this particular action of playing soccer and my person. Such that this action is thabit, it's there, it's stationary for me. It's not something that's fleeting, going and coming, and so on and so forth. Okay? So the word here used to refer to the believers is not alladhina amanu, but it's rather what? Al-mu'minun. If you've made iman part of your identity, then here are some virtues that you should definitely, certainly have. Okay? What are these virtues? Let's look at them. إذا ذكر الله. Okay. Whenever mentioned is Allah. Whenever Allah is mentioned. Okay? It doesn't tell you who is mentioning Allah. It says, you know what, it doesn't really matter. What's important here is who is being mentioned. That person that could be mentioning could be yourself, could be another person, could be the person you're getting into an argument with, could be the preacher in your mosque or your Husainiyah, right? Could be the universe itself. But rather, whenever Allah is mentioned, what happens to these people? They tremble. They tremble. Their hearts tremble. Okay? What is one of the requirements of something reaching your heart? If you imagine you were late for work and you were just rushing out and you really had to get there, you were late, you were really super late, you were like half an hour late to a meeting that you had to get to, okay? And at that time, the best of preachers comes and is trying to say, wait a second, I have some golden advice for you if you just, I want to talk to you right now and so on and so forth. You're preoccupied with just trying to get the morning crunch, get into your meeting and so on and so forth, right? Are those words going to sink into you and you're going to really take them to heart and so on and so forth if you're preoccupied with trying to get to a meeting? They're not. They're not going to be able to sink into you. So, what is one of the requirements of something causing your heart to tremble? Obvious requirement. Any takers? Go ahead. Okay, first thing is just to actually be attentive towards that thing. Yeah. Okay. Before something comes to your heart and hits you deep there, where does it have to come into first? Your ears first. First you have to actually listen to it. Okay. Second, where? When you listen to it, then you have to understand it. You can get in your eyes. After your ears, it doesn't go to your eyes. After your ears, it goes to your mind. You understand what you've heard now. Okay? So, for example, let's take the eyes example. I see the cigarette package, and the cigarette package says that smoking is bad for you, and it shows this horrible picture of someone's gums, basically, after they smoked for so many years. Okay? I see that picture, that goes into my mind. Now I understand, okay, I equate this result to cigarettes. I have an intellectual understanding of that. Great. Alhamdulillah. Okay. That's sufficient for it to make my heart move towards that particular concept? No, it's not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that, listen, if you are a mu'min, if you are part of these al-mu'minun, then it's the case that whenever Allah is mentioned, what happens to these people's hearts? They tremble. What is this trembling from? Is it trembling from fear? Like, are they scared of punishment, wrath? What do you guys think? Is it because they see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as this, na'udhu billah, tyrant, and they're just scared that any moment he could arbitrarily just put us in hellfire? Is that the case? Is that what's happening with these mu'minun? This concept of fearing Allah, what does it stem from? Please, sister.
I think from shyness, like fully understanding the greatness of Allah. When in the presence of someone who's bigger than you, you're automatically feeling shy.
I'll take your description and I'll put a different word to it. Sajid. Amazement. Awe. The description is exactly as the sister said. Right? I'll just put a different word than shy. I'll say the word awe. Okay? But the trembling that's done is because they recognize exactly who is being mentioned. Okay? So mentioning also has multiple types. Do you have a question? Yeah.
It's a particular person asked, in case there is fear or it is present in the heart, is that a negative thing to have fear to that?
Fear can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what it's leading you towards. That's very important to understand. Sometimes shaitan comes and puts the fear of certain things in us so that we don't go towards those things. For example, he'll come and put the fear of marriage in front of somebody who's single so that they don't go towards that thing entirely. Okay. Other times, fear is a good thing. where it pushes somebody to be more careful where they tread. Okay? Fear is also a naturally occurring thing in a person who's about to make one of the biggest decisions in their life, which is choosing a spouse. Okay? Sometimes fear comes into a person as a help from Allah, which says what? This is a major decision. Don't make it willy-nilly. Do your research. Don't just stick to the appearance of things. Looks don't last. Period. So what the result of the fear is determines whether that fear is divine in its nature or shaitani in its nature. If that fear is leading you towards ita'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasul and being more careful and getting counseling on the things that you need to be doing, right? That's a good fear. If that fear is leading you towards rejecting the action entirely, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Okay? Instead of being cautiously doing an action, you're saying, I'm not going to do the action at all. That's a little bit dangerous. Perhaps reconsider that fear. So, their hearts tremble when Allah is mentioned. What types of zikr do we have? When I say something is mentioned, how many different types of mentioning can I have? One time is through my tongue, so I'm talking to you right now. I'm mentioning the verses of the Holy Quran. Okay. Is there a different type of mention? My grandfather used to wear this very special fragrance, this very special atr. And every time I smell that atr, it serves as a mention of my grandfather. Is that okay to say? Okay. Can we have a third type as well? I'll give you two. Go ahead. Reading. Okay, so one time you basically read something and that reading is a mention. No words have been taken place. Okay. Is there another type of mention that we can think of? Sorry.
I don't know if it could count as a mention, but like when you look around the creations of God, could be a...
That's very good. That is extremely good. Let's link that to reading for a second. And the atr example as well. So what's happening here? When I smell that fragrance, right? That fragrance has become I've associated so closely with my grandfather that every time that I smell it, right? I don't even recognize what the company of this brand is and what this brand is and what the looks of this atr is. I'm not involved with that at all. The appearance of it and so on. So I'm not involved with that at all. I'm entirely involved with something that it's pointing towards, which is what? The memories of my grandfather. Okay. When you're looking at that word and you're reading, so for example, on the screen you have some words that are there. Is your focus on the curvature of the words? That, wow, this is curved in this way, and then there's a straight line here. Wow, over here it's curved the other way. No, you're not. Those symbols, they become fani. They are non-existent, really, right, in the meanings that they represent. Okay. So when you're looking at the words on the screen, these words before you, let's say the word up there, Bismillah, right? The ba, sin, and mim, right? Once you have practiced reading and you learn to read and so on and so forth, then no longer does that ba, sin, and mim hold independence, and now you're looking at the ba and the nukta there and then the different things. You're actually looking at the meaning instead. You're going beyond that which is the apparent. Okay? In a very similar manner, the mu'mineen, when they interact with dependent beings, they're not occupied with the dependence. They know that this dependent being behind it has an independent entity. And thus, every interaction with existence for the mu'min, at whatever level they may be, becomes a dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When they see a beauty, a kamal in a person, they don't associate that to this person. And that's it. I see a great doctor, right? That capacity to be a great doctor didn't stem independently from this person. when they see a great picture being drawn, they don't just focus on the pen and say, wow, what a great pen has drawn this great picture. They go beyond that. They look at the arm. No, they don't focus there. They go further. They look at the person. No. They go further than that. Most intellectuals go until the person. The mu'min goes one step further. So just how the pen was seen as a tool, really, and I was attributing the beautiful painting to the painter, not the pen, not the hand, right? In a very similar manner, when they see the beauty of this existence, they don't associate it with just the apparent means. They go beyond that. They associate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this way, then what happens? Every existence is now what? It's a dhikr. It's that fragrance, perfume that reminds me of my grandfather. It's that word that takes you to a particular meaning. You're not occupied with the word anymore. You don't care for the fragrance anymore. You go towards its asl, its root. That's the first thing that happens to these believers. Salawat, please.
Muhammad.
A quick question. These mu'mineen, we said that there was a particular trait that they had to have, like the soccer player and playing soccer, right? Looking at the previous section, the verse that we used there, the word ita'a, hint there. What particular action has to become part of their identity such that they now are called al-mu'minun? What word is it? What type of obedience is it? Is it the obedience of somebody who has to shovel snow in 3 a.m.? No. What type of obedience is it? Willing obedience. Okay? So is it only limited to like mornings or when they're feeling happy? Is it like, okay, only when I'm feeling happy and I've gotten my cake and my friends are happy with me and everything is perfect and the stars align? Is it willingness then? Or is it something that encompasses their being? Meaning that it's the first thing that comes to them when the stars are not aligned even. But this particular willingness is very special in its nature. So your speed towards it. And if you do that, if you sped enough, and you made this particular ita'a part of your identity, then what are you? You are al-mu'min now. And if you're al-mu'min, then what happens to you? What are some of the signs that you're a mu'min? When you are an avid reader, as opposed to somebody who's learning to read, let's take that example. When you're learning to read, you don't right away go towards the meaning behind the word. You actually sound it out, that T and H and E specifically has meaning for you. You look at the T first and you're hooked up on that. And you look at the H and then the E. My daughter is learning to read right now. And then you try to connect these sounds together and then you get one sound and now you go towards the meaning behind that one particular sound. Okay? So when you're in the stages of alladhina amanu, you're in that stage. The dependent beings themselves hold their own entities, the T and the H and the E, and you're looking at those sometimes mistakenly as independent things, trying to solve them. Okay? And then you get to a stage where now you're looking at the, and now you're not looking specifically at the dependent thing as an independent thing. Okay? When you reach that stage now, ita'a leads you there, to the point where it becomes part of your identity, and now what happens? Now you become al-mu'min. When you're al-mu'min, one of the naturally occurring signs are that you're not occupied with the appearance of things. You go past that. Everything becomes a dhikr of Allah. And when everything becomes a dhikr of Allah, what happens to you? Are you scared? You're in awe. What's the next sign? And we'll end the session, second session here. Can one of the brothers read the next sign that's present in the word? It starts with wa idha tuliyat alayhim ayat. What happens when the tilawa of the ayat is done for them? Being first, that's زادتهم إيمانا. Okay. Let's open this one up a little bit, just like we opened the first virtue, and then we'll end it here for today. Meaning my session will end. So again, if you notice, in this particular case, I'll open the idha up as well a little bit. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have presented this particular trait and the trait before it without the idha. He could have said that it's not when. Just say, verses are read to them and they do this. And mentioning of Allah is done to them and they do this. But this idha kind of shows us there's a gradation here. There's a gradation here. Not a gradation. A gradation here. Okay. That whenever X happens, then Y happens. Right? So for one person who's trying to practice this idea of doing ita'ah of Allah and getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the start, this idea of the dhikr of Allah might be limited. It might not encompass 24 hours of their being. It might encompass only when they're in their salah, for example, or when they're in the dhikr of Musibah or Aba Abdullah, for example. Okay, or only in the months of Ramadan, for example. Right? This what we sometimes associate commonly as like a spiritual high. Okay. But if you practice this ita'ah, if you practice this obedience of Allah and His Rasul, then the gradation of this particular word increases more and more. The idha happens more. Right? This when starts to have a higher quantity in occurrence in your 24 hours. Okay. So idha tuliyat. What's tilawa? Sorry? To read. Why can't I say qara'a? Sorry? To recite. It's a special type of recitation. It's a so talawa, the root word, it means for something to come after another thing. Okay? So tilawa is the recitation after which comes some form of understanding. It's not just a recitation. In the words, when the Arabic word tilawa is used, there is a presupposed understanding amongst the Arabs that you understand that language. Right? It's a new phenomenon now that we can recite something but not necessarily know what we're reciting. And we can recite the verses pristinely, but if I told you what did you recite, you'd be like, I gotta open a translation for that. That didn't exist back in Arabia back then. There was an irtikaz back then. That when this word is used, right, within it has an understanding that the person is understanding that which is being done tilawa of. A recitation which is followed by some sort of an understanding. So, إِذَا تُلِيَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتُهُ, when the ayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are recited upon them, زَادَتْهُمْ إِيمَانًا. What's an ayah? A sign. Can we link that to the previous virtue in some ways? What is that T-H-E or that ba, sin, and mim? They're a symbol. They're a sign which points you towards what exactly? A meaning. Okay? So, the word ayah or ayat here could be referring to the actual verses of the Holy Quran, right? And the verses of the Holy Quran are ayat. Why? Because what do they point you towards? We translate them as verses, but in actually they're an ayah. What is it pointing you towards, this ayah? The one who revealed this particular ayah. Tawheed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. So when an ayah is recited towards them, what happens? Why does their iman increase? I was sitting somewhere and someone said to me that whenever you don't know the answer to a question, throw it to the audience. This is not one of those questions. Okay. So what happens? Why does their iman increase if, based on the information you said so far, these are al-mu'minun, that it has become part of their identity really, right? And they've gone further. They're starting to now see things as dependent beings, and they're involving themselves with the independent by means and through the dependence. Okay? They're not stuck just in the dependence. Now after that, the second verse that's mentioned is that whenever an ayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is then tilawah of, is recited for them, and I have the Holy Quran for example, right? What happens to them? Their iman increases. Why does their iman increase? So we clarified one thing. It's not just a recitation. It's a recitation which is followed by some sort of an understanding. Okay. What is it that causes their iman to increase? Go ahead. Their hearts? Their hearts tremble. Why do their hearts tremble? Because they're in awe of what? This ayah, what does this ayah have in it that they're in awe of? When I go up to a mountain and I reach a cliff and I see a very beautiful scenic valley before me, imagine Banff, basically. Lake Louise, Banff, right? You see that? My heart's trembling because of the substance there, that beautiful mountain, the river, and so on and so forth. What does this ayah have that's causing that particular heart to tremble? That particular iman to increase? Sorry? Okay, so it has a mention of Allah. This particular ayah has a mention of Allah. But remember, this particular ayah is an ayah of guidance for the mu'mineen, right? Hudan lil muttaqeen, for the people who have taqwa, people who have iman. This particular ayah is something that is a guidance for the mu'mineen. So now, when they're seeing this ayah as a tool to get towards Allah, as a pointer towards Allah, right? What's happening is that they are themselves increasing in their iman. How? Well, they see that which is being given to them, because they had the presence of the mind in understanding that particular concept. Remember, I thought if you're rushing towards a meeting and I wanted to give you the best of advices in 5 to 10 minutes, it wasn't going to affect you unless you were, as the sister said, open to taking that particular advice. When these people go towards the ayah, they know who they're approaching and what they're approaching this ayah for. They're not approaching it to pass time. They're not approaching it because somebody has put it in the schedule that from this time to this time we'll recite the Holy Quran as a formality. When these people who are mu'mineen, who have this iman within them, are approaching an ayah, they're approaching it in a very specific manner. And this is Allah speaking to me, not Allah speaking generally to mankind only. They're saying this particular verse, I am the audience of this verse right now. Allah has revealed it, and right now I am listening and understanding the words of Allah, my Creator. And in those words, I'm trying to get some sort of guidance for myself. They're in awe also of the contents that are presented there, the surety behind them. Not everybody has a text with them that is in line with reality to the pristine, absolute level. So if you are an iman, if you have iman, if you are a mu'min, that you understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be somebody who's providing this ghufran, this rahmah, your needs to be fulfilled, right? You're doing ita'at of Allah and the Rasul. You understand by means of this ita'at, you're going to have your needs fulfilled. And you're hastening towards this. You make that particular iman part of your identity. such that you're not occupied with the dependent things, rather you're occupied with the independent. Now when you're interacting with the words of the independent, you know exactly whose words you're identifying with, you're interacting with. You're interacting with the words of somebody who's entirely in control, entirely present, okay? Entirely aware of not just the general scenario, but my specific scenario and situation. And now this interaction is a very different one. It's not superficial in their nature. And hence, it gives the capacity for the person listening and understanding to now increase their iman.